I think one of my favorite things is to hear a piece of football history about an individual maybe that I've never heard of before. I'm sure you share the same thing. Well, Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com joins us today to tell us about an amazing, almost Forrest Gump-like figure of early football. That story I think you're really going to enjoy. Stay tuned. Hello, my football friends. Welcome to the Pigpen. This is Darin Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. And once again, we have our weekly visit with Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com. Tim, welcome back to the Pigpen.
Hey, Derek. Good to see you again. Looking forward to talking. And I believe this story is going to be gold, Jerry. Gold.
Gold, Jerry Gold. All right. Well, I'm sure that
it could be gold, Darin Gold, but I'm just working off the Seinfeld routine.
Okay. I got you. Now I got the Seinfeld reference. Now I got it. I was trying to fit it into your story. But that's somehow segueing into our Tim's recent tidbit that he wrote titled Eddie Egan, College Football Player and Summer and a Winter Olympian. What can you tell us about Eddie Egan, Tim?
Yeah. So, I published this one in January, so just prior to the Winter Olympics. So it's just kind of an oddball story. Doesn't have a tremendous amount to do with football, but enough. So there's this guy, Eddie Egan. He grew up in Colorado, and I think he must have come from some level of wealth, but he also, like, maybe on his parents' ranch or something, supposedly he used to fight some of the cowhands. That was kind of the story, whether it's true or not. Box. So he ends up, and he's living, he ends up at University of Denver, in either for the 1915 or 1916 football season. And so he plays there as a freshman. But then World War I breaks out, so he joins the military. Now, somewhere in there, but it's so before he joined the military, he had won the Rocky Mountain AAU middleweight championship in boxing. So obviously he's a pretty tough guy. Had to be a pretty decent athlete to be a boxer and playing football. And Denver had pretty good football teams back then. So so he ends up joining the Army, and so then there's stories in the newspaper about him because he was middleweight champ, and then he's going to box in the Army and stuff. But he never ships overseas. It's just kind of the way it worked out with him. And then he entered Yale. He got discharged, and he enters Yale in January of 1919. So instead of going back to Denver. And because he had been in the military during the war, he was eligible to participate in what they called the Inter-Allied Games, which was it was kind of like a mini Olympics, but it was only for men, and it was only men who served in the military during World War I. So it was held, basically in Paris, but they had all you name it, all kinds of sports. So he goes over there and he wins the championship in the Inter-Allied Games. But he then comes back to Yale for the fall of 1919 and goes out for football. And I mean, best as I can tell, he was on the team for a couple of years. And I know he got into some games because I find his name in like the substitution list. So he played, but he wasn't like some big football player. And then in 1920, he goes to Paris again for the 1920 Olympics, and he wins a gold medal, wins a middleweight title. He comes back to Yale and starts the boxing program. So before that, they must have had it as kind of like an intramural sort of thing or a club, but he gets it going as a varsity sport. And interestingly, one of the guys who later coaches the boxing team at Yale is Gerald Ford, who becomes, U.S. president. He went to law school at Yale and was an assistant football coach and was the boxing coach while he was there. So then this Egan guy, he graduates as a Rhodes Scholar. So he goes to England, gets a PhD in law, comes back and becomes a successful U.S. lawyer. So, he's just living the life and, living in New York City, and kind of everything's just like a normal, influential, rich guy life. But then in 1932, one of his buddies, who was the captain of the Olympic bobsled team, the four-man team, ends up losing one of his pushers shortly before the Olympics, because the guy was qualified for like two-man or individual or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So then so this guy says, "Hey, can you, knowing this guy's pretty strong, but whatever, hey, can you join my team and be a pusher?" So here's a guy, he may not have ever seen a bobsled before, but he ends up on the Olympic team and at Lake Placid, and they win the gold. So,
wow.
So he's a guy, I just think it's so funny that here's this guy who, was a college football player, real good program, but he was, Olympic gold. He actually was in the 24 Olympics as a boxer too, but got knocked out fairly early on. And then he ends up winning an Olympic gold. So he's the only guy who has won gold medals in the Winter and Summer Olympics in separate events. There was, I want to either a guy or a woman, I'm not sure, that won in the 1920 Olympics. Like, figure skating was a summer sport, so somebody won figure skating gold in 20 and then 24 and 28 when it was winter. So they're officially gold medalists for both, but he's the only one who's done it for two distinct sports. So then just one other weird thing about him is, so after World War II, he had done some kind of administrative work during World War II, something with the air transport, and so he ends up the guy Robert Ripley from Believe It or Not.
Mm-hmm.
He had arranged to fly commercial flights on Pan American Airways, and to try to set the world's record for fastest guy circumnavigating the globe on commercial flight. So, and then he gets sick right before it happens. So Egan takes his place, and so he flies. He sets a world record for circumnavigating, which today you could do, probably within a day, right?
Right.
But it took 147 hours for him at the time.
Yeah, so anyway. Egan's a real Johnny on the spot. He fills in for bobsled team, fills in for Ripley. Yeah.
I mean, there's not many people who can claim to have, medaled in boxing and, shows. He's like, "Hey, why don't you ask Ken?"
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of amazing things about that. But sit here and think about what they're doing over in Europe. So 1919, they have this, and I know it's not the spectacles it is today, but to have a major world competition in France a year after the war's done, and then 2 years after hosting Olympics. I mean, that's got to be a pretty tall task for those folks to have to do.
Yeah. So like back then, I don't think people were even like building new facilities for the Olympics at the time, and there were so far fewer events, right? So it may not have been as big a deal. And I think just from a logistics standpoint and infrastructure, but I think for them it was like, this just shows that we're back to peacetime, we're going strong, whatever, that kind of.
You still got to have a place for athletes to stay and everything. And you think about Egan, he's back and forth from war. I'm sure they didn't have air travel back when he did it. So he went across the Atlantic by boat, 3 times in 3 years?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just one of those weird stories. It's just, I watch like the bobsledding when it's on, right? But otherwise, I know they train hard and they, select these athletes, but and they still have the pusher types, right?
Yeah.
But just the idea of like, hey, are you available? And you're on the Olympic team,
Yeah, well, there have been some famous like football players. Like, didn't Herschel Walker push for bobsled team one year?
So.
Some other
Yeah, I
football
think
players,
so.
I think, have done it too. So interesting. He must have been the first. He's a trendsetter.
He was, and
Yeah,
then I don't think anybody else did it for quite some time, but
right.
old Eddie did, and they ended up in the 80s, or 90s. They put out a postage stamp, with him
Oh,
on the
amazing.
thing. So
Wow, that is an amazing story, Tim. And you seem to find these little, you call them your tidbits. They're these little trinkets through history that we can't appreciate because nobody remembers a guy who did this over 100 years ago. But you do this quite often in your tidbits. Maybe you could share with people where they could find more of your information you put out.
yeah, just so my website, it's a Substack, footballarchaeology.com. Just go there. Either just bookmark it and come whenever you want, or subscribe, which allows you to, which means you're going to get an email from me every time there's a new story, and then the email includes the story itself. So, and then I've got my author page on for my books and all that kind of stuff, which is just look me up and you can find it.
All right. Amazing stuff as always, Tim. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing this tidbit of football history. And we'd love to talk to you again next week.
Very good. Look forward to it.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.